This is Land of Havilah, Isaiah 9. In the last chapter, Yahweh said the king of Assyria would invade in the very near future. He said it would be a time of distress, darkness, gloom, and anguish in Israel and Judah. That came to pass starting about 732 BC, with Syria falling, then with Israel falling in two stages, the first in 732 and again about 721, then with Assyria invading Judah in 701. But now in this chapter, God won't let that gloom and distress stand forever. He's a God of redemption. He will not allow Israel and Judah to be permanently trodden. He'll eventually give them stunning and overwhelming victory over all nations that oppress them and over all their own sin that oppresses them. But it's going to require a Messiah that'll lead them in righteousness. Concerning that complete redemption, verse 1, "For there shall be no more gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the latter time he has made it glorious by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in the land of the shadow of death, on them the light has shined." Comment in verse 1, Zebulun and Naphtali were two of the northernmost tribes of Israel. Their land was in the region of Galilee. That land was assigned to them as a permanent possession, same as all the promised land was given as a permanent possession to the various tribes of Israel. The promise went back to Abraham that God would give all the land of Canaan to Abraham's descendants as an everlasting possession, Genesis 17:8, which would include everything from the border of Egypt in the south to the Euphrates River in the north, Genesis 15:18. That land includes Judea, Samaria, and Galilee. The promise of that land was irrevocable because, quote, "the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable," Romans 11:29. So what we have in this prophecy in Isaiah chapter 9 is God renewing his promise that all Israel, including Judah, will indeed possess the land. The Assyrians will flood in the short term, and we now know from the history of the region that after they came, the Babylonians would flood in, then the Greeks, Romans, and Arabs. The Holy Land would be trampled underfoot by the Gentile nations for centuries and millennia. Jesus reinforced it in the Olivet Discourse that after his time the Jews would, quote, "fall by the edge of the sword, would be led captive into all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled," end quote. But Jesus went on that at some point, quote, "then they'll see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory," Luke 21:27. Jesus himself would arrive to redeem Israel and set up his glorious kingdom to make the trampling by the Gentiles a thing of the past and that gloom and darkness a thing of the past. In verse 1, God brought contempt on Zebulun and Naphtali, tribes of Israel, when the Assyrians carried them away captive. But in the, quote, "latter time," end quote, as verse 1 says, God will make it glorious by the way of the sea, meaning that region which is there next to the Sea of Galilee. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in the land of the shadow of death, on them the light has shined. This text out of Isaiah was quoted in Matthew 4:15 and 16, saying that it was fulfilled when Jesus came to live in Capernaum by the Sea of Galilee, that the people of the region saw a great light when he came. But it was just the dawn of that light, because in the next verse out of Matthew, Jesus preached to the people of that region, quote, "repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand," end quote, speaking of that light dawning more in the region, especially when he comes the second time. Now, going on in Isaiah, speaking of Jesus' first and second comings, the first being a matter of history now, and the second being a matter of the future, coming to rule in glory, initiating the millennium, verse 3. "You have multiplied the nation, you have increased their joy. They rejoice before you according to the joy in harvest, as men rejoice when they divide the plunder. For the yoke of his burden and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as in the day of Midian. For all the armor of the armed man in the noisy battle, and the garments rolled in blood, will be for burning, fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. His name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there shall be no end, on David's throne and on his kingdom to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from that time on, even forever. The zeal of Yahweh of armies will perform this. Comment in verses 3 and 4, the Messiah will multiply the nation, cause rejoicing, break the yoke of burden, and break the rod of the oppressor, as in the days of Midian. It'll be similar to the time that Gideon drove the Midianites out. The Messiah will drive the Gentiles out of the land and not allow foreign nations to oppress Israel. In verse 5, armor and the blood-stained garments of war will be for burning, fuel for the fire. There'll be no war or instruments of war. Might as well burn them. Then in verse 6, unto us a child is born. That will be Jesus in his first coming. A son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, which is his second coming. He'll govern Israel and all the world as King of Kings. His name will be called Wonderful for obvious reasons, Counselor for obvious reasons, Mighty God. This is one of the biblical proofs that Jesus is God. This is the child that was born and son that was given. He's Mighty God. No question about it by this proof and many other proofs. The child and son's also called in verse 6 Everlasting Father, another proof. And finally, Prince of Peace. He brings peace to individual hearts and peace to nations. No more inner turmoil of the individual or outer turmoil of nations. Peace and not war. The repurposing of spears for pruning hooks, the burning of armor, and so forth. To be clear, any of us is free to proclaim Jesus as our personal king now, because the unseen kingdom is already in our midst. Quote, behold, God's kingdom is within you, Luke 17:21. But in the second coming, it'll be a literal, visible kingdom. There are far too many prophecies of it to take it metaphorically. It'll be the literal kingdom of Jesus Christ on earth, with Jesus being personally present as king and ruler of Israel and the world. Then verse 7, of the increase of his government and of peace there shall be no end. It'll keep getting better and better all the time. Just when you think it can't get any better, it will. There will be no end to the increase of peace and of his government. His reserve of glory is never ending. That increase of peace and government will be on David's throne in verse 7. Jesus will occupy the throne of David over Israel, as Yahweh promised David, 2 Samuel 7:13. And in the same way David dominated many nations, and the kings of those nations served David, so the nations of the earth will serve King Jesus as the worldwide King and Lord. In verse 7, there'll be justice and righteousness, quote, from that time on even forever, end quote. It's a description of the 1,000-year reign of Jesus, Revelation 20, verse 4. But the justice and righteousness of it will extend beyond the 1,000 years into eternity future, as verse 7 of the Isaiah text says, quote, from that time on even forever, end quote. The chapter so far has been a prophecy that the distant future will be glorious, but now it's back to the gloom of the immediate future. Verse 8 coming up is addressed to Jacob, also known as Israel. As we read through it, it becomes apparent that Yahweh is addressing all Israel, including Judah. It's a word to the northern and southern kingdoms as a whole. Verse 8, the Lord sent a word into Jacob, and it falls on Israel. All the people will know, including Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria, who say in pride and in arrogance of heart, the bricks have fallen, but we'll build with cut stone. The sycamore fig trees have been cut down, but we'll put cedars in their place. Therefore Yahweh will set up on high against him the adversaries of Rezin, and will stir up his enemies, the Syrians in front and the Philistines behind, and they'll devour Israel with open mouth. For all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. Comment in verse 10, the bricks have fallen, but the people imagine they'll build back more luxuriously with cut stone. And the sycamores have been cut down, but the people imagine that better trees will spring up in their place, namely cedars. In other words, there have been some recent calamities in the land, but the people are optimistic they'll recover and be better than ever. But not so, says Yahweh. This is only the beginning of trouble. Yahweh will call their foreign adversaries against them. The Philistines have attacked on the south and the Syrians on the north, but still Yahweh's hand is stretched out against Judah and Israel. His anger against them is not quenched, though Yahweh has struck them, verse 13. Yet the people have not turned to him who struck them, neither have they sought Yahweh of armies. Therefore Yahweh will cut off from Israel head and tail, palm branch and reed in one day. The elder and the honorable man is the head, and the prophet who teaches lies is the tail. For those who lead this people lead them astray, and those who are led by them are destroyed. Therefore the Lord will not rejoice over their young men, neither will he have compassion on their fatherless and widows. For everyone is profane and an evildoer, and every mouth speaks folly. For all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. Comment in verses 13 to 17, though Yahweh is angry, Israel doesn't repent. They keep provoking him. Therefore Yahweh will cut off head and tail, palm branch, and reed in one day. These are metaphors that Yahweh will cut off everyone in the land, because in verse 15, Yahweh gives a definition of the head and tail. The head represents the elders and honorable men, not that there are any true elders or truly honorable men, and the tail represents the prophets in verse 15, not that they really are prophets, but the people think they are. The prophets teach lies in verse 15. They're false prophets. In verse 16, the elders, honorable men, and prophets lead them astray. It's the blind leading the blind. In verse 17, Yahweh takes no pleasure in the young men either, and on the bottom end of the social scale, he won't have compassion even on the fatherless children or widows, because from top to bottom they're profane and do evil. Every mouth speaks folly. For all this, meaning because of all this evil, Yahweh's anger isn't turned away or his hand of anger withdrawn from them. They've suffered, but there's more coming. The whole society is clueless because they reject Yahweh, and they're clueless that they're clueless. Coming up, they'll be burned up by their own wickedness. Verse 18. For wickedness burns like a fire. It devours the briars and thorns. Yes, it kindles in the thickets of the forest, and they roll upward in a column of smoke. Through Yahweh of armies' wrath, the land is burned up, and the people are the fuel for the fire. Comment from Yahweh's point of view, the people are thorns and briars covering the land. Their wickedness sets them ablaze, and the smoke of that brush fire rolls up to the sky. The people are fuel for the fire of Yahweh's wrath. Still in verse 19, no one spares his brother. One will devour on the right hand and be hungry, and he'll eat on the left hand, and they will not be satisfied. Everyone will eat the flesh of his own arm. Manasseh, Ephraim, and Ephraim, Manasseh, and they together shall be against Judah. For all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. Comment in verses 19 to 21, each one devours his neighbor and even devours himself, yet their hunger for devouring each other and for devouring themselves is still not satisfied. They continue to devour, they self-destruct. Though Yahweh's hand is against them, the root of the problem isn't Yahweh. He would be for them, but they're doing it to themselves. Isaiah 10 is next.